Xin chào tất cả các anh chị đang có mặt trong buổi webinar ngày hôm nay ạ. Em là Thùy đến từ công ty trách nhiệm hữu hạn thiết bị khoa học kỹ thuật Trung Hải. Thì bên Trung Hải chuyên cung cấp các giải pháp để phục vụ các phân tích kiểm dư lượng kháng sinh, vi sinh, virus gây bệnh vân vân. Thì hôm nay Trung Hải rất hân hạnh được hợp tác cùng hãng EIT để mà giới thiệu một cái giải pháp mới, công nghệ mới kiểm soát vi sinh trong nhà máy. Đó là cái máy Bactiscan, công cụ phát hiện nhanh Biofilm. Chúng ta cùng xem cái buổi webinar hôm nay để biết được Bactiscan là gì, nguyên lý và công dụng của thiết bị này ra sao. Mong rằng kiến thức hôm nay mang lại sẽ giúp ích được nhiều cho các anh chị trong công việc của mình ạ. Thì sau đây xin mời Victor sẽ trình bày nội dung của hội thảo. Những thắc mắc cần thiết thì các anh chị sẽ nhắn vào khung chat để ban tổ chức có thể tổng hợp và gửi chuyên gia để giải đáp ạ. Hi Victor, let's start. Please speak slowly so that we can make sure that everyone can hear you clearly.
Yes, of course. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah.
Shall we begin the presentation?
Yes. We'll begin right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce myself as your EIT associate for Vietnam. I've been asked by Trong Hai to present today the Bactiscan proposition, and of course it's actually my pleasure to do this today and to present the proposition to you. If I may just go directly into the presentation, if that's okay. So let me push it up there. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes, we can see your present.
That's fine. Okay, thanks. So let me proceed straight away. So EIT is part of the biopharma group of companies who work with what we would define as the regulated industries across Europe, the UK and Ireland. The biopharma group works with pharmaceutical, high-end food production, biopharmaceutical, and a lot of government laboratories. Currently, we are the #2 COVID test supplier to the UK government. We work in a lot of consultation, manufacturing, including freeze drying, clean air, clean room facilities, fumigation, and so on and so forth. So the EIT proposition was actually an excellent fit for the biopharma group. EIT originally started as a company called Easy Testers, whose core business was the detection of cracks in metal surfaces. This still is our core business today. So we would work with a lot of the world's top breweries, pharmaceutical, food production, and dairy producers all over the world. Easy Testers was acquired in November 2019. And since then, the biopharma group have invested a significant amount of money in bringing the core technologies to the next level. And included in these technologies is Bactiscan, and that's what we shall speak about today. So, as I mentioned, Biopharma Group is actually a UK-based company. So EIT is headquartered in Winchester, in the UK, just outside of London. Our current research and development center is based just outside of Gatwick Airport in London. We also have an R&D center in Spain. We have offices in France, in Ireland, and this is actually where I am speaking to you from today, in Philadelphia and in Mexico City. And as well as these core offices around the world, we now have a global reseller network all over the world as well. Currently, we have 34 resellers speaking 24 different languages, and this reseller network continues to grow on a monthly basis. So we're very excited about that. as the Bactiscan proposition is spread around the world. So this is probably our core where Bactiscan actually comes into play, is actually the breaking the chain of contamination, and I'm sure this is something that you are all more than familiar with. Bacteria, as we know, is a contaminant agent. This is easily spread around your facilities, and the way this happens, the chain of contamination, if you like, is a contaminant agent usually sits in a reservoir, which is usually the surface, and the port of exit is usually someone's hands or a container or something where the bacteria is actually held, and it's moved around the building. So this is where Bactiscan comes into play, because we can actually contain the contamination at the port of exit by identifying the contamination on a surface and putting in place a corrective action in order to prevent and to break the chain of contamination. So currently, what a lot of our customers are using is Atp swabbing or sampling. We find this is very effective, but there are a number of drawbacks to Atp swabbing. The first of which is, of course, you can only swab a very small area. It's usually 4 to 5 inches square, and you have to swab in a specific direction. Secondly, when you're swabbing blind. So normally you swab quite a large surface. You're only swabbing 3 or 4 or 5 inches square. So it's very easy to miss a contamination that could be on the surface that's invisible to the naked eye. And so this is one of the main drawbacks. And also what we're noticing as well, this is actually a major manufacturer of ATP swabs. You can probably identify who they are through the colors, so obviously we've removed their names. But the issue that we have here, for example, is validated detection and identification of salmonella in 2 days. So although swabbing is quite effective and very efficient, the turnaround time, it takes very long, because within 2 days, your product, if it's not already on the retail shelf, it could already be consumed at this stage. So this is an issue. This is a spurious swabbing system, and again, we have the same problem. Delivers results 24 to 48 hours. So Bactiscan will actually combat this for you, and this is why we actually developed the technology. It's using UV wave altering illuminant lighting to light a surface. So in order to effectively validate Bactiscan, we asked Camden BRI, who are one of the world's leading authorities in food contamination and validation. We asked Camden BRI if they could validate Bactiscan for us against food-based contaminations, which they did. This is a published document. It's actually available freely online, and it can be downloaded from our website, and speaks very clearly of the effectiveness of Bactiscan. And we're very pleased also to note that Camden BRI have actually now acquired Bactiscan as part of their toolkit for their validation programs for other customers around Europe and the British Isles, and in some parts of the United States as well. So a very good validation document. I would encourage all of you maybe to read it to give you a better understanding of the mechanics of Bactiscan and how it works and the effectiveness of same. So sorry, this is actually a video here. It doesn't actually work at this moment, but if I might quickly discuss the mechanics of Bactiscan. As I mentioned earlier on, Bactiscan works on UV light. We use UVA type lighting, which is actually very safe and safe for normal use, everyday use. It doesn't actually cause any problems. What we're using here is 4 separate UV lights working on separate frequencies on the fringe of the UV spectrum. So each light has a different frequency. Independently, it's just a normal UV light. It doesn't really do a whole lot. But when these 4 lights merge on the surface, that is when the magic happens, and that is the core of Bactiscan and how it actually works. We also have a very specific filter just on the face of the UV lamp that actually allows us to sharpen the focus of the UV lights. And again, this filter actually forms part of our IP. So again, as we know, when these 4 UV lights merge on a surface, any contaminant that's on the surface will glow green. And this is the benefits, this is the beauty of Bactiscan. So although the lights are actually of a blue color, when it bounces off a contaminant on the surface, it will glow that contaminant as green. So a lot of our customers will actually ask us at this stage, well, if you can see the contaminant in green, then surely you should be able to tell from the color if it's Listeria or E. coli or Salmonella. We can't, because we're not actually physically illuminating bacteria or biofilm. We're actually illuminating the protein shell that surrounds this biofilm and this bacteria. So it's actually the core it's actually the core of the protein shell that the light is reflecting and bouncing off of. And this is what's actually giving us the green glow on the surface. And so we have some examples of these as we go along, and I'll actually be sharing these with you as we go across this presentation. So these are some key observations that we're noticing with our customers around the world, and these are the key observations that we share with all of our customers. So in every instance, be it food production or pharmaceutical or dairy, we have two core standard operating procedures. The first is a cleaning regime or a cleaning program, and the second is a swabbing regime or a swabbing program. In both instances, we rely on the human to carry out this work effectively, and that tends to be the flaw in each case. So for example, when you have a human who cleans a surface, the human will tend to clean the flat surface, the obvious flat surface, and tend to neglect edges such as here, around the corners, or even around or underneath objects that are actually sitting on the surface. We also notice that when the human swabs, they tend to swab the same area week in, week out. So they tend to come back to a specific point on a production line, and they tend to swab that point, trying to find a different result from the last time. I'm not saying that every customer does this or every company does this, but this seems to be the norm that we're actually seeing. And this is what tends to cause the problem. And we're going to give you some examples of how Bactiscan can actually help in these instances. So we have a number of photographs here that we've been given by our customers. In every instance, the contamination has been proved to be contaminant through a swab. In most instances, we're allowed to tell you who the customer is, but in many instances, we are not. We can't tell you who the customer is. We can't tell you where they're located, but we have been given permission to use these photographs. So this is actually a very good example. This is a meat processing facility. This is actually in Singapore. You can clearly see that there's been an extensive cleaning program has just been carried out, including the top of these stainless steel surfaces, including the floor. Now, what seems to be clean to the human eye, when illuminated using Bactiscan, we can clearly see the contaminant right here on the surface, and there's actually quite a lot of it here. Under normal lighting conditions, this is completely invisible. But by using Bactiscan, we can highlight this contaminant on the surface, and a corrective action can be put in place very quickly. But what we're clearly seeing here is a very good cleaning regime, but it's been let down because the cleaners are just cleaning the flat surface and neglecting the edges and the corners. Okay, moving on to the next one, meat processing again. Another great example of the obvious flat surface being dealt with and being very clean and very thorough, and yet all of this is being ignored. and you can clearly see a very deep green color here. This is highly contaminant. This is actually very dangerous because of the green color that's actually here. What we're noticing is, as you can see, the cleaners are cleaning these flat surfaces. When quality come to carry out a swab, again, they are swabbing the obvious flat surfaces and walking away, and completely neglecting this piece of equipment that's highly contaminant and that is going to cause problems down the line. What we're also noticing here as well is this switch here, the on-off switch. It's very clean, and it's obviously very clean because it's been touched quite a lot. And every time the operators switch this machine on and off, they are lifting contaminant off this switch and moving it elsewhere within this building. So what we can actually see here again, this is a stainless steel storage facility. Under normal light, this looks beautifully clean. It actually looks spotless. But when we illuminate it using Bactiscan, we can clearly see very high levels of contaminant on the surface here on the back wall. Normally, this would be okay because this back wall is not a high touch area. The area of concern here, however, is right here, because it's just on the edge. This is a high touch area, and people will pick up this contaminant and move it elsewhere within the building. We're also seeing quite a lot of contaminant here and across here. We're unsure what this is, but we do know that the quality people within this business were very upset when they actually saw this level of contamination on the surface, because they didn't actually realize how much contaminant was actually there. Another interesting observation with this photograph, if I may, is down here. Now you can clearly see here what's actually happening here is this contaminant. The cleaners are trying to clean off this contaminant, and the chemicals that they're using is being diluted in water, but it's being diluted too much. So instead of picking up the contaminant, all they're doing is moving it across the surface and not picking it up at all. The corrective action here is not to dilute the chemical as much as they have, possibly even use a stronger chemical, and that would clean all of this away. But not only are we actually seeing very heavy levels of contaminant on the surface, we can also identify that your cleaning regime is not up to par and not performing the way it should be performing. Another small observation, again, it's a meat processing facility in Singapore. Very clearly, you can see how clean the surface is when looking at it through the human eye. But when illuminated using Bactiscan, we can clearly see some high levels of contamination right here. Again, this is a high touch point. This is an area that needs to be, sorry, has my screen paused there? I beg your pardon. Okay, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, I'm sorry about that. So we're seeing high level contamination here, so a corrective action needs to be put in place. Here we have, this is a photograph that Lactalis in Spain allowed us to use, and they allowed us to use their name. And Lactalis is one of the world's largest dairy producers. This is a yogurt manufacturing facility in Barcelona. This is a yogurt fill line, so these arms here pick up the yogurt container. It's presented to the injection heads, which in turn fill the container with yogurt. They were having a very serious problem with a high bug count each time they ran a production run. After a production run, they carried out a very detailed cleaning program. They would power wash the whole system. They would scrub it. They would swab it to ensure everything's fine. But when they ran new product, they came up with the same problem again. We were able to find this contaminant within 15 minutes of being on site. So you can clearly see here, the white here is actually the yogurt product that's sitting on the surface. The green that's starting to form on the edges is the protein shell. It's actually bacteria that's starting to grow. So what we're seeing here is the very early stages of bacteria starting to form on the surface. So what we can actually highlight, we can start to see bacteria growing very, very quickly. Within a number of hours of a product, the actual product falling on the surface, we can actually start to see the bacteria starting to form already, and the small molecules of bacteria starting to form here. So in this instance, the engineering team thought this was fine. All we have to do was swap out the injection head and our problem is solved. It actually isn't, because on closer inspection, you can clearly see the spores for the bacteria actually here sitting on the surface. And what this is actually telling us here is when this is a 5,000 liter container where the yogurt is actually manufactured. When they actually run a new product within this container, they actually noticed that the inside skin of this container was actually pierced, and the yogurt was actually flowing down in between the plates and across the bottom of the actual tank itself. So every time they scrubbed this down, they stopped the product and scrubbed this down, there was still product sitting between the two plates inside. And as it was sitting in these two plates, it was turning to bacteria. The bacteria spores were growing very quickly. So when they ran the next product production run, it actually pushed the bacteria spores down and onto the injection head. And that's why we can see the spores growing so quickly, because they had already formed between the two sheets of the actual tank itself. So the corrective action here was to repair the crack on the inside of the tank, which was completely unknown about to this point, to repair the crack, a deep clean, and start to run product. And this is actually working perfectly now. But it's a great example of finding the actual contaminant itself and tracing back to find the source of the contaminant. And this is where Bactiscan comes to the fore. This is one of India's largest ice cream manufacturing companies. This is a 60,000 square foot facility, and they were actually encountering quite a high bug count on the production floor. As I mentioned earlier on, when you're swabbing, you can only swab a 4 or 5 inch square area. So when you have a 60,000 square foot facility, where do you start? And this is the problem. So it will be very difficult to actually isolate an actual area where the actual contaminant is coming from. We were able to walk this production line, and within 20 minutes, we were able to identify this cluster of contamination right here. And this seems to have been the problem, because when this was fixed, the bug count actually went away. So this is what we see in normal daylight. This is what the quality team see. This is what the cleaning team see. But by illuminating the surface with Bactiscan, you can clearly see here, this blue and white area here, this is actually the product falling on the surface. It's not contaminant. It's actually okay. It's actually fine. The green, however, is contaminant. This is bacteria starting to form on this surface. And this is actually the core problem within this manufacturing facility, because as people were walking past this, they were rubbing against this heat exchanger, and they were actually carrying this bacteria with them around the production hall. So, and what we can see here is that we had 2 gaskets that actually failed in this heat exchanger. So there was a very fine mist of milk product that was actually being blown onto the manufacturing, the production floor. And again, the floor was quite heavily contaminated, because we were able to illuminate the floor as well. Again, simply by illuminating the area by using Bactiscan. So under normal circumstances, under normal light, this is what everything looks fine. But when we illuminate with Bactiscan, this is what we can see, and a corrective action can be put in place. So again, this is actually another area within the same plant in Asia. Very heavy concentrate of contaminants sitting on this surface here, totally invisible to the human eye, but completely illuminated when we use Bactiscan to reflect on the surface. Cleaning, this obviously needs to be cleaned off, but this was actually quite an area of concern here and here, because these are high touch areas and people will be touching these on a constant basis. We're unsure where this came from, but it's obviously because of the color of it, it's quite serious and needs a corrective action put in place. Some more examples of normal daylight, what things look like. This is an area that usually wouldn't be cleaned and usually wouldn't be swabbed, but under Bactiscan you can clearly see there's a high level of contamination right here. This is a locking mechanism where the operator places their thumb here so they can actually unlock and unlock, and every time they place their thumb here, they're picking up the contaminant that's actually on the surface. Healthcare, so this is what we're seeing in hospitals. We're actually selling Bactiscan to quite a lot of healthcare authorities around the world. This is one in Ireland that we can see, and it's actually a classic example of a cleaning regime that's actually quite good. You can see how clean this area is. This area is here. The floor is quite clean. This bar is very clean. However, this area has been missed, and there's quite a high level of contamination on the surface. Under a normal UV light, dust and dirt is highlighted in blue, and that's what we can actually see here. However, this is green, and this is a high area of concern right here. What we've also noticed as well is when the cleaner was carrying out the cleaning program, they were cleaning in an anti-clockwise direction like this using a cloth. And because they were cleaning in an anti-clockwise direction, they completely missed all of this on the edge. And this is a problem. Although this is not a high touch area, this is. So this could easily have been picked up by someone's fingers when moving this bed. So this is obviously an armrest here. This is actually the top side of the armrest. And what we're actually seeing here is biofilm. This is a mottled effect plastic armrest with quite a lot of indentations. And because there's indentations here, the contaminant can fall between the indentations and harden. What we're actually seeing here is quite a good cleaning regime, because you can see all of these areas are actually very clean. The problem is here with the indentations, because again, the chemicals that this hospital are using have been diluted too much. So instead of picking up the contaminant and removing it from the surface, they're simply just spreading it across the surface and allowing it to harden. So the corrective action here was to use a much harder chemical on this surface, which they did, and we came back the next day and all of this was gone. So again, we can see high levels of contamination on the surface that are a problem, and plus we can also identify areas where your cleaning regime is falling down. So staying within healthcare again is another example. This is an operating theatre in Canada. So on this table is placed a basket, and in this basket the surgeons place their scrubs after a procedure. So what you're seeing here is the scrubs are thrown against the wall and it falls into the basket, which is fine. So we're seeing a number of things here. Number one, the obvious flat surface that the cleaner is cleaning and walking away and completely neglecting all of this. But what we're also seeing is quite a high level of contamination in green, these green spots. We think this is blood. We're unsure what it is, but we do know it is a contaminant because it has been confirmed to us as a contaminant. And all of this is completely invisible to the human eye. So the blue here is simply dust and dirt from the actual scrubs. These areas here are actually where the sleeves are flaying against the wall, but the green spots and the green patches are actually splatters of blood that are being thrown from the scrubs as they're being thrown against the wall. What we're seeing here is an air circulation unit that's over an operating bed. So what we believe this is quite a large amount of blood that was actually squirted onto this without the theatre staff actually realizing it, and totally invisible to the human eye. The issue that we're actually having here is when this air circulation unit is running, it vibrates, and when it vibrates, the actual contaminant is actually flaking off, and you can clearly see it here on this lighting stalk. And if it's actually sitting on the lighting stalk, then there's actually a very good chance it's also lying on the bed that's actually underneath this air circulation unit. So quite a heavy piece of concern right there with this issue. Totally invisible, and it was actually unknown to these people that this contaminant was actually overhead at the time, so corrective action put in place again. This is quite an interesting photograph again. This is one of the world's top 10 pharmaceutical companies. We're not allowed to name who this company is, and we're not allowed to tell you what country this was taken in, but they have given us permission to use these photographs in these types of presentations. This is a clean room that had a very high bug count. It was actually causing quite a problem. They carried out a number of corrective actions and a number of cleaning programs to try and find the source of the contamination, but every time they scrubbed this clean room, within a number of days, the contamination came back again. Within seconds, we were able to find this. So this is an instrument that's sitting on a table, and this is what it looks like to the scientists within this clean room environment. This is how it looks under Bactiscan. So what we're seeing here is a number of things. During the cleaning regimes, again, all that's been cleaned is the obvious flat surface, as you can see from the table behind. This instrument was never cleaned, and you can clearly see here. The blue flakes that you see here is dust and dirt. It's usually not a problem, but this is highlighting that this instrument hasn't been cleaned. But the major issue is right here and right here, where you can clearly see the green deposits of bacteria that's actually sitting on these two control points. So the blue is dust and dirt, the green is actually contaminant. What was actually happening in the background on the ceiling, there's an air circulation unit where there was mold actually growing in it. And as it was working, it was blowing contaminant onto the table underneath the air circulation unit and onto the vials and the jars that were sitting on this table. So as the scientists picked up these jars, the contaminant was falling onto their fingers, and every time they used this instrument, they transferred the contaminant from their fingers to these points here. And again, when the next scientists use this instrument, they're picking up this contaminant and moving it within the room. So again, very quickly, we were able to see the source of the contamination, and we were able to put a corrective action in place, normally completely invisible. So again, and also what we're highlighting here is that the cleaning programs that they're using, they're cleaning the obvious surface, which is the flat surface, and completely neglecting about the equipment that's actually sitting within the laboratory. This is molten cores. This image was actually supplied to us by Ecolab, who have validated Bactiscan, are actually currently using Bactiscan as part of their toolbox. This is an area here. Anything that shows 70 parts per million or above is classed as a fail. This is reading 335. You can clearly see the contamination on the surfaces here. This is actually the same machine. It's a canning machine. These are cans inside for canning beer. So you can see along here, it's actually very clean. Along here, it's very clean, and these areas here is very clean. This is the underneath of this actual machine itself, very similar to actually here. So the cleaners are doing actually a great job on the obvious, easy to get to areas and completely neglecting all of these areas here, which means high buildup of contaminants on the surface, which is actually causing the problem for them. So again, a corrective action was put in place, and this bug count was reduced significantly. So Molson Coors were so impressed, they actually asked us if we would go to Glasgow and take a look at their production site there, because they were having a problem with their bottling plant. So we took a trip to Glasgow, we went to their bottling plant. So this is an injection head again. The bottle is actually picked up here, it's introduced to the injection head, and it's filled and it's moved along the production line. We were on site for over 3 hours. We couldn't find any contamination. We have to say that this is probably one of the cleanest factories we've ever seen. So we were actually getting quite concerned, because after 3 hours, we still could not find the source of contamination. However, just before we left, we found this. So what you can actually see here, let me increase this for you. These are metal caps that are placed on top of the bottles to seal the bottle. So everything else is actually spotless around it. So these caps are highly contaminated. We have no idea what this is, but we were very surprised when we actually saw this ourselves. So the rest of the plant is spotless. It's completely clean. There's actually no issues. So what we've actually highlighted here is, although your plant is very clean, you could spend quite a lot of time with cleaning programs and swabbing programs to try and eliminate any sources of contamination to your production line, when in actual fact, a third-party supplier was actually causing the problem all along. And irrespective of the amount of times that you clean down your production line, every time these caps were reintroduced to the production line, the bug count went through the roof. So we took a walk into the warehouse when we opened one of the boxes that actually had these caps in it, and it lit up like a nuclear reactor. It was actually incredible. So, I mean, the problem here wasn't the actual factory itself. It was actually a supplier who was actually introducing contaminated product. So again, in another brewery, this time it's in Asia, we can clearly see it's a stainless steel table here. Under normal light, it actually looks perfect. So a cleaner would actually look at this. There's a pretty good chance that they'd actually keep walking once they see this, because it actually looks fine. In actual fact, there's actually quite a lot of contamination on this. And you can see from the green turquoisey color that this is contamination and this is an issue. Again, it just goes to show, under normal light, this is what we're seeing, but when illuminated using Bactiscan, this is what we're seeing. And you can see from the light source here, it's not very dark. We just need enough light to illuminate the surface using Bactiscan. That's all we need. Once we have that, then that's actually fine for us. This glow here, you see, this is actually the reflected off Bactiscan that's actually bouncing off the surface. So this actually isn't anything to worry about. These are some before and afters using Bactiscan. This is actually a company called Pascal Foods, who again based in Spain. They do for Burger King. Sorry, I beg your pardon. So we knew that there was actually going to be an issue with this serrated edge here, and of course there is, and you can clearly see it's actually here. But this actually isn't the problem that we're highlighting. The problem that we're highlighting is actually under here. You can clearly see the sides have been cleaned thoroughly, and the top of this pipe has been cleaned, but underneath here has been neglected, as well as under here. So again, the cleaners are simply cleaning the obvious surfaces and walking away. This is an area that Pascal told us they were having a problem with this particular machine. They were getting quite a high bug count and couldn't find the source of it. There was quite an effective cleaning regime in place, and we can clearly see it here when we're affected. This is clean as is here. So again, the cleaners were focusing on the obvious surfaces, when in actual fact, the problem was actually here on the roller. This is actually a rubber roller, very, very high levels of contamination right here. So Pascal Foods actually asked us to see if we can investigate this further to find out where the source of contamination was actually coming from. So we actually took a look inside, and this is actually what we saw. So this is what we would see under normal circumstances. This is what we see. When we illuminated it with Bactiscan, this is what we were able to see. And what's actually been highlighted here is the cleaners, when they clean, they simply clean as far as here and neglect all of this. So you can even clearly see the cleaning line for where the cleaners, will they start to clean and finish right there. And so they neglected all of these and left all of this behind. So this is actually a machine, when this machine runs, it actually vibrates very heavily. And when it vibrates, it actually loosens the contaminant and it snows onto the surface, and it actually gets picked up on the foil and brought onto the rubber roller here. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that worked out okay for you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Okay, hi Victor. Give me a second, please.
Right. Actually, can I be excused just for one moment? Can I just be excused just for one moment? Hello?
Sorry, I can't hear you clearly.
Oh, if I may be excused for 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, one moment. I'll let you know when I come back. One moment.
Okay, okay. Chào các anh chị ạ. Thì phần trình bày của Victor tới đây là hết. Thì các câu hỏi anh chị có thể gửi vào trong khung chat để mà trong quá trình chờ những câu hỏi từ các anh chị á, thì Victor sẽ trả lời những số câu hỏi mà ban tổ chức đã thu thập lại trong quá trình mà gửi link đăng ký. Thì do một vài cái sự cố kỹ thuật đó, thì Victor sẽ trở lại trong vòng vài phút nữa. Các anh chị có câu hỏi thì có thể nhắn vào khung chat giùm em nha.
I'm terribly sorry. I actually had someone at my door. I'm terribly sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Do we have some questions?
Yes. Victor, we will proceed to answer the questions we have collected from the registration form. Then you will check the question. Yes.
Okay. Let me. Would you be able to put those questions up on the screen for me?
Yes, five questions I sent you before.
Okay. All right. Okay. One moment. Let me. Okay. I should try and open these for you now.
Yeah.
Okay, I have them now. So we've received a number of questions already, and I will see if I can address these now as best I can.
No, I can't see your screen.
Okay, one moment now. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so the first one, how does Bactiscan control industrial hygiene? How effective and reliable? So as per my presentation, Bactiscan will allow you to identify clusters of bacteria, biofilm, mold, or yeast on a surface that is invisible to the naked eye. So as we discussed in detail, the most effective means for finding a contaminant on a surface at the moment is to swab. But the problem with swabbing is, A, you're swabbing a very small area, 4 to 5 inches, and B, you're swabbing blind. By using Bactiscan, we can identify the contaminants that need to be swabbed and need addressing. So for example, we're working with a hospital group in the United States that have 5 hospitals within the group. They were spending $10,000 per month on swabbing kits. By introducing Bactiscan, that is now down to $500 per month, because Bactiscan allows them to identify the clusters of bacteria that need to be swabbed. So you're not swabbing blind anymore. That is probably the most effective. How effective and reliable? We're getting very good results from our customers around the world. We're currently working with, as I mentioned to earlier, Lactalis. We work with Danone, we work with Nestle. We're currently implementing a plan to work with PepsiCo on a global basis. We work with Coca-Cola, Heineken, Carlsberg, InBev, and the list goes on, and a number of hospital entities around the world as well. We're also working with the Canadian government where we can identify powdered mildew on cannabis plants. The cannabis industry is legalized in Canada, and we've actually discovered that we can see powdered mildew on a plant before it becomes a problem. Again, invisible to the human eye. So for your next question, how can end users do self-checks at turquoise light, spot under Bactiscan's light, is bacteria film or not? We would always, first of all, if it's glowing green, it is a contaminant and it needs attention. That is the main point. If it's glowing green, you've got a problem. We always suggest to our customers that if you see something on a surface, when in doubt, swab. Always swab, and that will identify exactly if it's E. coli or Listeria or Salmonella. But for a lot of our customers, for example, in the dairy industry, when they see something that's green on the surface, they usually know it's probably Salmonella. If it's the meat industry, they usually know it's probably Listeria because of the environment. But what we will say, what we always say, if it glows green, it's a problem, it needs attention. What is the surface area projection distance of Bactiscan to surface for microfilm? We would suggest, because we use a filter to sharpen the focus of the UV lights, this hinders the effectiveness of the illumination of Bactiscan. We find Bactiscan to be most effective within 1 meter to 1.5 meters of the surface. So that's 3 to 5 feet from the actual surface. But again, if it's a darkened room, that will assist as well. If the room is very bright, then you may need to get closer to the surface. But if you think that you can illuminate maybe a 10 or 20,000 liter container with Bactiscan, you can't. It will not be possible to do that. You will need to get close to the surface in order to pick up the actual bacteria on the surface itself. Can you explain the principles of Bactiscan to detect bacteria and biofilms? Again, it's 4 UV lights working in 4 separate frequencies. 2 of these bulbs are actually bought off the shelf from a specific supplier in Asia. But 2 of the bulbs are actually custom made for us. They are a very specific frequency that we need. So they're actually made for us, so you cannot buy these off the shelf, and that's part of our IP. Independently, these UV lights, they don't do a whole lot. It's the same as a normal UV light. It will just show a contaminant on the surface as blue, and that's it. But when they merge together on a surface, that's the key to Bactiscan, and that's actually where the magic actually happens, because it turns the actual color from blue to green, because we're now highlighting a protein shell. Which proteins absorb Bactiscan UVA light and emit a turquoise light? Again, this is a more technical question. I have shared a document there with Toy. Toy, if you want to share it with the group that explains the mechanics of the UV light, I would be grateful. But I would actually highlight that UVA is very safe. There's actually no issues with UVA, and it is safe to use every day. Our customers have been using Bactiscan for over a year now, and we haven't encountered any problems with UVA at all, so it actually works quite well. What is the minimum size of clusters of microorganisms? Well, as you actually saw from the photograph, from lactalis, from the yogurt plant, we can see contaminants starting to form in microbes on the surface as soon as the microbes become available. As soon as the protein shell starts to form, Bactiscan will illuminate it in a green color. So it actually works very, very quickly. In normal environments, the protein shell will start to grow on a contaminant within 5 to 6 hours. But we have seen protein shells starting to grow within 2 to 3 hours of products such as milk or even meat stuffs falling on the surface. Within a number of hours, we can clearly see the protein shells starting to form, where the actual product is turning from a blue reflective color to a green reflective color, as we saw on the heat exchanger in India in the ice cream plant, where the milk product was actually glowing as blue, and then the actual contaminant itself, the bacteria, was glowing green. So there are the 5 questions that we actually got. Toy, is there any more from the group?
Hi, Victor.
Hello.
Yes, can you receive the questions from the attendees?
One moment now. They're in Vietnamese. I can't read them. Can you read some of them for me?
Okay. Okay, you can answer the question, the English question first.
Okay. The area that Bactiscan can illuminate, that's actually one question that I'm actually seeing here. So again, it depends on the lighting condition. Bactiscan works by illuminating a surface. So obviously, the darker the room, the more you're going to illuminate. But Bactiscan works under normal lighting conditions. The glow would approximately be about 1 meter wide. If you're standing 1 meter from the surface, the glow will be 1 meter wide. So you can actually scan quite a large area very quickly. Okay. Would you be able to read out some more of these questions, Toy?
Hello.
Yeah, would you be able to read out some more of these questions?
Yes. The first one, could you please help me to answer this question? How could we determine which is the good bacteria, which is harmful bacteria?
Harmful bacteria will glow as in a green color. Now, sometimes it is possible to get a false negative, where a bacteria on the surface may be dead, maybe because of a hydrogen peroxide spray or something like that, but the protein shell will always remain behind. So we would always advise our customers, when you see something that's glowing green on a surface, take action and swab to identify exactly what it is, if it is a problem or not.
Okay. I will read the continue. Do you have any validation reports for this equipment? If yes, please show us. How does it work?
Yes, we do. The Camden BRI validation report is actually on our website. I can share that with you, Toy, if that's okay, and if you can share it with the group. We also have a validation report from Ecolab, and we also have a number of reports from our larger customers that I'm happy to share with you. So we do, yes, we do have published validation reports.
Okay.
I see a question here. It looks a bit difficult to distinguish the area of blue and green light in some pictures. How obvious is it in reality? I agree. The photography does not lend justice to what we're actually seeing on a surface. It is very distinguishable in reality. The greens are usually quite a bright green to a turquoise color, and the blue is a blue color. But unfortunately, most of the photography is taken on a camera phone, so the quality isn't great. But when you do highlight a surface, it does become very obvious which are blue and which are green.
Okay, next question. Let's share about the safety guideline of this machine for user.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. Again, we're using UVA illumination, which is totally safe. It's completely safe, and we have documentation on that we can share with you. So the Bactiscan unit itself has been developed specifically for the food production market. So it is IP67 rated, which means it's not waterproof, but it's splash proof. It's drop tested to 1.5 meters, which means if you drop it from 1.5 meters, it stays intact, it won't shatter, there won't be any shards. We use UVA light technology, which is safe. Although we always recommend, as part of good manufacturing practice, that you should wear safety glasses, but you're probably wearing them anyway. And we also use smart battery technology as well. So when the battery is being charged, when it is full, it falls into hibernation and it actually goes to sleep. So you can leave Bactiscan plugged in for many hours, even days, and it will not, it won't be a problem to the unit itself.
Okay, next question from Ông Victor. One more question, that the microbiological could be classified based on the color detected.
Well, you would have to swab it to classify what it is. What Bactiscan is doing is highlighting the clusters of contamination on a surface that the human eye cannot see. So it highlights the clusters, which then allows your quality department to carry out a detailed swab to identify exactly what it is.
Okay, next question. When the Bactiscan low battery, is there the notification signal, while the battery low is the detectably warranted?
Sorry, could you say again?
When the Bactiscan low battery, is there a notification signal? And while battery is low,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Bactiscan comes with a charging cradle. So when you connect the Bactiscan to the cradle, it will automatically recharge itself. So in effect, Bactiscan will always be fully charged. But when the battery is running low, it becomes very noticeable because the illumination deteriorates. It becomes less so as you're working with Bactiscan. So it becomes obvious that you need to recharge it again. For the next generation Bactiscan, we will be including a battery meter on the actual unit itself. It's something that's not there at the moment, but we've already had this question from the market, and we will be implementing it in the next Bactiscan unit.
Okay, some question, Vietnamese question. I will collect it and send it for you later.
Yes. Please do, and I will respond as quickly as I can. I can actually see a question here, and it relates to the lighting of the processing area. And this is actually a very good question, because this is something that has come up in the past. A lot of companies are starting to use LED white lights at the moment, which completely illuminates the surface in a production. This is causing a problem for Bactiscan, because this LED illumination doesn't allow Bactiscan to illuminate a surface, because it dilutes the Bactiscan. However, we are working on a fix for this. It's a shroud that will fit onto the front of Bactiscan and will allow for enough shadow for us to illuminate a surface. So there is a fix. At the moment, LED white light is a problem, but we are putting a fix in place.
Okay. Okay, so give me a second, Victor.
Yeah.
Dạ thì cái phần trả lời những câu hỏi bằng tiếng Anh á, thì Victor sẽ giải đáp trực tiếp luôn. Còn những câu hỏi tiếng Việt á, thì bên ban tổ chức sẽ tổng hợp lại và trả lời một cách cụ thể nhất, gửi lại thông qua các email của các anh chị ạ. Thì cái bài trình bày hôm nay á, thì chắc là cũng kết thúc tại đây thôi. Cảm ơn các anh chị đã sắp xếp để tham gia cái buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay. Mặc dù biết đầu tuần thì công việc sẽ hơi lu bu một tí. Dạ thì định kỳ bên Trung Hải cũng có tổ chức những cái buổi webinar về các đề tài vi sinh kháng sinh để mà update thêm về tiêu chuẩn nè, hoặc là để phổ biến thêm những các phương pháp hiện hành. Thì nếu các anh chị quan tâm á, thì bên ban tổ chức sẽ cứ góp ý để có gì ban tổ chức sẽ tổ chức những cái buổi mà đúng với nhu cầu của mình nhất ạ. Hi Victor, thank you so much for your presentation, and the conference now will probably need your support later on, and email you when we need further assistance. So have a nice week. Yeah.
You too, and it was wonderful to have the opportunity to speak to your customers, and thank you again. I look forward to receiving questions.
Dạ thì còn thêm một phần nữa là bên Trung Hải hiện là đang có một vài cái máy demo, cho nên nếu như các anh chị nào đó có nhu cầu mình muốn sử dụng tại nhà máy luôn á, thì có thể liên hệ trực tiếp với lại bên Trung Hải để mà bên em có thể sắp xếp lịch demo tại nhà máy mình. Dạ rồi thì cái buổi webinar sẽ kết thúc.